In the dense, unforgiving jungles of the Philippines, a lone figure moved silently, unseen by the world he once served. The war had ended decades ago. Nations had moved on. Yet he remained, a soldier without orders yet bound by duty, loyal, unyielding, and forgotten. Hiroo Onoda, the man who refused to surrender, even after the world declared peace. What would drive a man to fight on for 30 years believing the war still raged around him? And what would it take for him to finally lay down his weapon? The answer lies in loyalty, survival, and the invisible chains of honor. This is a story of war, obsession, and the human spirit tested beyond reason. By 1944, Japan's empire stretched across the Pacific, but the tide of war was turning. On the distant island of Lubang in the Philippines, the Japanese army prepared for what they believed would be a defensive stand. Young men, barely out of adolescence, were dispatched with orders they could neither question nor refuse. Among them was Hiroo Onoda, a 21-year-old intelligence officer from Wakayama Prefecture. Trained at military school, disciplined, loyal to a fault. To Onoda, the emperor was not just a figurehead. He was the embodiment of duty, honor, and Japan itself. And when he was sent to Lubang, his mission was clear: disrupt enemy activity, gather intelligence, and if necessary, fight to the death. But the war Onoda entered was already ending. Across the globe, in Europe, Germany had fallen. In the Pacific, Japan was retreating. Yet on Lubang Island, time would stretch differently. For Onoda, and the soldiers with him, surrender was inconceivable. Their orders were absolute: do not surrender, no matter what happens. These were young men sent into a world where the rules were rapidly changing, yet their hearts and minds were anchored in the old world of obedience and honor. Arrival in jungle life, March 1944. The Philippine Sea stretched endlessly under a bright, unforgiving sun. Lubang Island, a small speck in the Pacific, seemed serene from above. Lush green forests rolling down to golden beaches, rivers carving through valleys, birds painting the sky with streaks of color. But for Hiroo Onoda, this was no paradise. It was the frontier of a mission that would define the rest of his life. Visual, archival footage of Japanese soldiers disembarking from landing crafts, trudging through sand and mud. Onoda, a 21-year-old intelligence officer, stepped onto the shore alongside 3 fellow soldiers. Each carried the weight of their training, the discipline ingrained since youth, and the unshakable belief in absolute obedience. Their orders were clear: disrupt enemy activity, conduct reconnaissance, and if necessary, fight to the death. No surrender, no compromise. No retreat. It was a creed, a mandate, a chain that would bind Onoda far longer than the war itself would last. The first hours were a mix of awe and tension. The sun glared down, turning the sand almost white-hot. The dense jungle beckoned like a dark cathedral of shadows and secrets. Every step they took brought the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, and the subtle watching eyes of wildlife that regarded these human invaders with indifference. But Onoda was not indifferent. Every sound, every shadow was a potential threat. Every leaf that fell could conceal an enemy soldier. The jungle was alive, and it demanded respect. From the very beginning, survival and strategy intertwined. The men set up a small camp camouflaged by ferns and low-lying shrubs. They moved quietly, whispering orders, establishing sentries, and mapping the immediate terrain in their minds. Onoda, meticulous and observant, noted every path, every water source, every potential ambush point. To him, every detail mattered because a lapse, even a minor one, could cost lives. Food was scarce, but the island provided. Coconut palms offered sustenance. Freshwater streams ran clear and cold. The soldiers fished where possible, collected rainwater, and scavenged abandoned villages for rice and dried goods left behind. Yet for all its beauty, the jungle was relentless. Monsoons brought days of blinding rain. Heat and humidity sapped strength. Insects swarmed with relentless persistence. And the unseen dangers, venomous snakes, hidden ravines, disease, were constant companions. Survival was never guaranteed. It had to be earned each day. And yet the true challenge was not only the jungle. It was the uncertainty of the war itself. Back on the mainland, Japan was losing ground. Across the ocean, Allied forces were advancing, reclaiming territories. Yet none of this reached Onoda in a tangible way. Only rumors, whispers carried by the wind, or faint leaflets dropped from planes, messages that seemed unreal and distant. To Onoda, such news was meaningless. Orders were absolute. He would not surrender. He would not yield. The war was still on his island, in his mind and in his heart. Comrade, do you think we'll see the Americans soon? Onoda, it doesn't matter when. Our orders are clear. We fight until the end. This adherence to duty, this absolute obedience, would become both his strength and his burden. Every day in the jungle tested not only physical endurance but mental resilience. Onoda and his comrades quickly learned that survival depended on adaptation, moving silently through dense undergrowth, setting traps along pathways, avoiding detection, and constantly rotating positions to evade potential threats. The forest was a classroom, and the lessons were harsh and unforgiving. The early weeks were also about establishing a rhythm, a routine that brought a semblance of order to chaos. They rose before dawn, observing the jungle's awakening, the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, the distant roar of the ocean, and they trained, planned, and prepared. Nights were the most treacherous. Darkness draped over the jungle like a heavy curtain. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves heightened alertness. Sleep came in short bursts, always with one eye open, always ready for a fight that may or may not exist. In these early days, camaraderie was essential. Shared meals, whispered conversations under the cover of night, moments of laughter, brief but vital, kept spirits alive. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease. Each soldier sensed that the jungle, while a refuge, was also a cage. The beauty around them could not erase the tension, the uncertainty, the unyielding weight of responsibility. Every decision carried consequences, every step could mean life or death. Onoda, ever disciplined, also began forming a philosophy of war that would guide him for decades. To him, the mission was not merely orders, no, it was a moral imperative. Loyalty to his superiors, obedience to his command, and the protection of his comrades became intertwined with his very identity. In the isolation of the jungle, these values would crystallize, shaping a mindset that would carry him far beyond the conventional end of the war. Thus began Hiroo Onoda's journey, a young soldier sent to a remote island, unaware that the world he knew was unraveling in his absence. In the lush, treacherous landscapes of Lubang, the seeds of a story that would span decades were sown. Here, in the heart of the jungle, a man's devotion, discipline, and endurance would be tested in ways that no war could have prepared him for. Years in the jungle, months turned into years. The young soldier who had landed on Lubang Island in 1944 had become a ghost in the jungle. The war he had been sent to fight was over, though Onoda refused to believe it. The world moved on, nations rebuilt, children grew up in peace. Yet in the dense greenery of Lubang, time was measured in survival, vigilance, and the unending adherence to orders. The jungle was no longer just a backdrop. It had become his home, his prison, his teacher. He learned to read the language of the forest, the way a leaf falls, the patterns of animal tracks, the warning signs of approaching humans. Every sound was scrutinized. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Survival demanded total awareness, and awareness demanded sacrifice. Sleep was shallow. Food was scarce. Illness was constant. Yet Onoda endured, driven by a sense of duty that had grown into obsession. Occasionally, leaflets would drift down from the skies, messages from the world beyond, proclaiming peace, announcing the end of the war. At first, Onoda tore them up, unread, dismissing them as enemy trickery. Later, Japanese officers were sent to the island, trying to persuade him to surrender. "The war is over," they told him. "You can come home now," but Onoda refused. "I will obey only the orders of my superior officer," he said. "Until I am relieved, I fight." His loyalty was unyielding, absolute, and unshakable. "Officer Hiroo-san, the Emperor has ordered peace. You can return." "Onoda, I am still under orders. I cannot surrender." As the years stretched on, Onoda's world became smaller yet more intense. His comrades died one by one, illness, accidents, skirmishes with locals. By the 1950s, he was alone. The jungle was both an ally and an adversary. It provided food and shelter, but it also tested his limits. Tropical storms battered his makeshift shelters. Heat and humidity sapped his strength. Snakes, insects, and disease were relentless. Yet every day he survived reinforced a sense of purpose. The war, even if imaginary, demanded endurance, cunning, and vigilance. Interactions with locals were complex. Some attempted to warn him that peace had come. Others saw him as a threat, a phantom raider who would steal supplies or sabotage crops. Each encounter was tense, moral decisions hidden in shadows, to attack or hold back, to kill or let live. Onoda's actions blurred the line between soldier and outlaw, hero and relic of a war that no longer existed. He was trapped in a moral landscape as thick and tangled as the jungle itself. Through it all, Onoda persisted. Letters, messages, and pleas failed to break his resolve. Decades passed. Lubang Island changed subtly. Villagers grew older. Houses were rebuilt. The world outside marched forward. Yet within the jungle, Onoda remained frozen in 1944, a man out of time, bound by honor and the invisible chains of obedience. The soldier who refused to surrender became a legend, though few knew it yet. And so the years in the jungle were not just survival. They were a crucible. Onoda's mind, body, and spirit were forged by isolation, devotion, and relentless vigilance. Each day was a test, each encounter a moral puzzle, each decision a reinforcement of the orders he could never abandon. In this way, the war raged on, not in cities or battlefields, but in the heart of one man alone in the vast Philippine jungle. The longest war. Decades passed, yet for Hiroo Onoda, the war never ended. The small island of Lubang, once a world of uncertainty and danger, had become a vast solitary kingdom. Alone now, he moved like a shadow through the undergrowth, a soldier out of time. The forest was his ally, his adversary, and his prison. Every day, every movement was dictated by orders he had sworn to obey 30 years earlier. By the 1970s, the world had changed beyond recognition. Nations were rebuilding, technology had advanced, and peace had become the global expectation. Yet Onoda, the last soldier, remained vigilant. Leaflets dropped from passing planes, letters from Japanese authorities, even locals pleading with him. All were dismissed as enemy tricks or hallucinations. To Onoda, only one reality existed: the orders given to him in 1944. The war was still on Lubang Island, and he was still fighting it. Local villagers, Hiroo-san, the war is over. You can return home. Onoda, no, my duty is not yet finished. I cannot surrender. For 30 years, Onoda survived through stealth and cunning. He avoided discovery, raided fields for food, and maintained an intricate network of traps and hideouts. His encounters with humans were rare and fraught with tension. Each interaction carried the weight of moral ambiguity, a soldier fighting a war that no longer existed, a ghost haunting a landscape that had moved on without him. The turning point came in 1974, when a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki arrived in Lubang, seeking the last soldier. Unlike others who had failed to persuade Onoda, Suzuki approached with courage and curiosity, not commands or authority. Days of careful observation, quiet dialogue, and unwavering patience finally convinced Onoda to meet the man who could change everything. Suzuki, Hiroo Onoda, the war is over. You can come home. Onoda, impossible, my orders. Suzuki, only your commander can relieve you of duty. If he says it's over, you can lay down your arms. After 30 years, Onoda finally agreed to meet Major Taniguchi, the officer who had issued the orders in 1944. Only when the official command came did Hiroo Onoda, the soldier who refused to surrender, finally lay down his weapon. 30 years of vigilance, struggle, and isolation ended with a single confirmation. His duty was complete. It was a moment of profound relief, awe, and disbelief, the culmination of a life spent in service, trapped between honor and reality. The longest war had finally ended, not with a battle, but with the recognition of duty fulfilled. Return to civilization. In March of 1974, 30 years after he first set foot on Lubang Island, Hiroo Onoda boarded a small plane bound for Tokyo. The dense jungle that had been his world for decades receded beneath him, replaced by an unfamiliar expanse of blue sky, clouds, and endless horizon. Every inch of this new world was foreign, yet familiar in a strange way. He was returning to the land that had sent him on a mission that had lasted an entire lifetime. The world had changed. Tokyo was vibrant, bustling, and modern, a stark contrast to the isolated, silent jungle he had called home. Cars filled the streets, neon lights reflected off glass towers, and the sounds of city life, traffic, conversations, laughter, were overwhelming. Onoda, the soldier of the jungle, was now a man out of time. Every sound, every sight reminded him of how far removed he had been from civilization, and how much had shifted in his absence. His arrival sparked a frenzy. Journalists, photographers, and television crews clamored for a glimpse of the man who had become legend, the last soldier of World War II, a living relic of an era long gone. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and for Onoda, the experience was surreal. He had survived storms, insects, disease, enemy skirmishes, and decades of isolation. But now the attention of the modern world felt like another kind of trial, a test of composure, patience, and humanity. Despite the spectacle, Onoda remained humble and measured. He spoke carefully, never boasting, always emphasizing his duty and obedience. "I followed orders," he said simply, "because I had to. My mission was my duty." That was all. For a man whose life had been defined by adherence to commands, these words were not empty rhetoric. They were truth. Every action, every choice, every danger had been filtered through the lens of obedience, honor, and survival. Reuniting with family was another journey in itself. Onoda's parents had long since passed, and the world he had left behind was unrecognizable. Friends and acquaintances had grown old, moved on, or passed away. The people he had known had lived entire lifetimes in his absence. And yet there were moments of quiet reconnection, fleeting but profound. A niece's gentle smile, a distant cousin's tentative handshake, a shared memory recalled in fragments. These small human connections reminded him of what he had sacrificed for duty and what he had endured alone. The public reaction was a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and incredulity. To some, he was a symbol of unwavering loyalty, a man who had maintained honor even when the world had forgotten the very war he fought. To others, his story was a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of blind obedience, of a life consumed by orders without question. A man trapped by ideals that had long lost relevance. Journalist: 30 years. Do you regret anything? Onoda: regret? No, I did what I was told. I lived as I believed was right. But I have learned that the world changes, and the world waits for no one. In the years that followed, Onoda sought to reconcile his experience. He traveled, wrote memoirs, and spoke to youth groups, sharing not just the story of his mission, but the lessons of perseverance, loyalty, and the human cost of war. He reflected on the thin line between duty and obsession, between honor and self-imposed exile. For Hiroo Onoda, the jungle would always remain a part of him. Its discipline, solitude, and survival etched into his mind and body, but so too would the lessons of returning to a world that had changed beyond his imagination. Perhaps the most profound reality of Onoda's return was the realization that duty and humanity are often at odds. The jungle had demanded survival and obedience, but the world demanded connection, understanding, and adaptability. The transition was not instantaneous. It took time, patience, and reflection for Onoda to merge the soldier he had been with the man he had become. Yet slowly he found a place in society, not as a relic but as a teacher of resilience, a witness to history, and a living testament to the complexity of human loyalty. Onoda's story, though remarkable in its duration and intensity, is ultimately a story of reconciliation between duty and life, between isolation and community, between the world of orders and the world of humanity. The soldier who had refused to surrender found, at last, a peace that no battlefield could provide, the peace of understanding, reflection, and the slow re-entry into a world that had continued without him. Hiroo Onoda returned from the longest war not as a conqueror, not as a hero, but as a man who had lived history in solitude, and who now carried its lessons into the present. His life reminds us that survival is only one part of human experience. The other is learning to live again. Hiroo Onoda's story challenges us to consider the nature of duty and loyalty. How far should obedience go? When does duty become prison? And what becomes of a man who sacrifices his life for orders he believes are unshakable? In psychology, his story exemplifies extreme indoctrination, but also resilience. In history, it shows the human cost of war, not just in death, but in decades of lost life, isolated from progress and connection. Today, his tale resonates with anyone caught between principle and reality, between loyalty and morality. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: Loyalty without understanding can lead to extraordinary endurance, but also profound isolation. And yet, Onoda's survival, his unwavering persistence, is a testament to the human spirit, even when it walks a lonely path. Hiroo Onoda finally surrendered, but his story continues to echo. A soldier who refused to surrender, even when the world had moved on. A man who lived 30 years in the shadow of duty, waiting for the right orders. His life reminds us of the weight of honor, the danger of blind obedience, and the endurance of the human spirit. If this story moved you, subscribe to The Quiet Font, where we uncover the forgotten stories that shaped our world.